I was walking around the whole day with a piece of smooth on that was wet stuck in my elbow. I was bumping into things and leaving little residual parts of it there. So, situational awareness, essentially. That's what you gotta have. You got something?
I came in a little late. Did you already go over things like slush casting?
Slush casting, I could go over that again if you'd like.
Okay, cool.
Essentially what you do is you get your mold here. Essentially this was the mold for it. I made it out of the resin, the fiberglass, the Bondo, smooth with Bondo, made it like this, how it is. Then it made its mold, and then what you do is you make a two-part external cast mold, or a dummy mold for it. And what you do is you take an external resin or something like that. You basically make a reservoir with the fiberglass matting along here. So then you add your resin and some more fiberglass matting so it hardens on this one side. This side's still bare. You flip it over. After it's hardened, you do another layer of the smooth-on latex. So it has a thin line right here on that reservoir. Make another reservoir out of this atop that so it sandwiches the latex inside the middle. And just layer again. And then you have your two-part external dummy mold, which you can pull off, have this here, and then you can apply them back together when you want to make that cast, pour it in there, slush cast it around with whatever plastic you want, and then, take it off there after that. So it's a little tricky, but once you get it down, it's easy. Then you can always invert your molds if you want to make a mirror of it too, so you can just, if you have like one side of, like say you're making like a sword or something like that, and just make one side of it, you can flip that over, make a casting of that with using some resin and a thin layer of latex after you have some of the stuff, I just forgot the name of it. Rebound. It wasn't rebound. It was you spray it, pull it off, so it doesn't stick. Shoot. The mold release. Sorry, I keep forgetting that name. You put the mold release on it, then you do that layering of it. You can just pull it off, and you have two sides of the mold. So you essentially have a mirror of each side, which can save you a lot of money if you don't want to sculpt the whole thing and take the time to do that. Mirroring stuff in molding and casting is a great technique to learn. I wish I had more experience with it because I just really make a whole thing like this. I mirror it on the computer, then I make it in real life, and then that's how I do it. I've never really had to mirror anything yet, so I would like to try it. I'm still learning. Been doing this for about 4 years, still learning. You always learn. Just keep an open mind, situational awareness. You can always figure stuff out.
A lot of stuff I see, including this guy, they modeled it in clay, and then they slush casted it with some form of like latex and everything like that. And usually at that point they didn't really care what happened to the clay, and they just like pulled it off, and they got the resin in and stuff.
Yeah, clay is more of a used for one-time castings because, like you said, they don't really care about what happens to it afterwards. With the fiberglass and stuff like that, this is for making repeated castings of multiple stuff. Like let's say if I wanted to make this thing for some reason over and over and over again, I could do it, but just because this is hard, if this mold breaks at all, hopefully it won't ever, like if it gets in the cold and starts breaking, I've never had a problem with that though, but I could just pour some more onto here and remake it, just keep going with it. Basically if you're mass producing stuff, this is great for this. I mean, if you ever want to get into selling stuff on Etsy or other places where you can just sell stuff in mass, definitely use fiberglass base molds and stuff like that, because then you can just keep going. I mean, you can even, if you're smart enough, I mean, if you can figure it out, you can try to figure out ways to make dummy molds that you can cast from and make other things, and you can even start making your own stuff. Like, let's say you want to make certain patterns you want to cast, you can just make those and keep going with that. So, any more questions? Come on.
How did you get the model for your head?
Which one?
Well, for the head model that you have.
This. This I use a program called Blender, and essentially it's a freeware 3D rendering program on the internet. And what you can do is essentially I just took a square, and then I made it have more faces and more faces. Faces are the flat surfaces. Like let's say this is the square that I had. This is a face. This is the face. Essentially each side. Essentially. I multiplied the sides to it, and then I figured out the size of my head, and I scaled it basically that size on the computer, and then I essentially just shaped it into a general shape of my head, so that when I put this on, I can literally, it'll fit snugly, and I'll probably suffocate when I have it on my head too long. So,
so you took some tape measurements of your head and scaled like a stock head model.
Correct. Essentially, what you got to do is go into converting measurement units there, I believe one blender unit, which is like one little square, is equal to an inch or a couple millimeters short of an inch. But you could also play around in the settings with that. You can literally set it up so you can scale it whatever you want to. So, you got a question?
And more of a thing. I know that 16 Maya units equals a foot in compared to a real scale, but Maya units are like any 3D unit is kind of
iffy, yeah.
Yeah, because like they're not intended to be comprised to. They're meant to be compared to each other, not to like real world scale. So
Yeah.
in the end, it usually comes down to you kind of have to like figure it out a little bit. But like I know everyone compares Maya units to Unreal, since Unreal does have a to real world scale. Unreal units is 16 equal a foot, so that's you can convert Maya units to Unreal, and that makes it easier for me.
That's a good point to bring up. When we put models in the Fiberglass program, when you're scaling them, a lot of people, when they make their own models, they scale them to letter sizes. Because Fiberglass scales to paper sizes. It doesn't scale to actual sizes and measurement units, as like he stated. You know, it's all in the program's own protocol's idea of how measurements are made up that makes the logic of the program work. So you can say that it has X amount of depth and Y amount of width and Z amount of height, but in reality, in the program itself, it's just like, oh, derp, 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 it makes sense to me, I'm Fiberglass, you know. And so then when you print it out, it's like, oh, this is just about an inch taller or an inch wider or whatever than what you want it to be. And so then you got to play around with it. A lot of it's trial and error if you're starting from scratch. I know there's a lot of people like the 405th, I believe, they do Stormtrooper armor and stuff like that. They're really good on giving you tutorials on how to make stuff just from scratch. Me personally, I kind of look at them and I just fussed around and figured it out myself just because I'm that kind of person. And this is after a while. I literally, to make this model for my Lego head, I literally started out by rendering a cylinder, which is this part here, and then I mirrored it so that when I'm working on something up here, it was modeling itself down here. And then I just would take the edges and shorten them so that they would make these different layers here on the curve. And then I made this part here by pulling it out a little more, pulling it out like that, and then cut it out like that, and that's it. And then down here, I actually didn't finish this one because this was just the test model to see for sizing in real life. I thought this model actually would fit my head on the scaling that it is. So I'm like, okay, cool, yeah, I'll print it out, it'll all be fine. And it comes out, it's smaller than I wanted it to be. So that's an example of that there. Scaling, yeah, you just really gotta play around with it and figure it out. Once you get it down, though, you'll have it. You got a question?
Speaking of scaling there, when you're casting, how do you deal with shrinkage?
Shrinkage, I've actually never had a problem with shrinkage. The one problem I've had is warping. So I saw that. Usually I do it when it's warmer out. Like when it's cold, it's just like, okay, I don't want to worry about shrinkage, so I'll just wait till it's warmer out, you know. So, and usually it's always like overcast molds too. I've never had to do anything under it where I'm doing all the sides of it. I usually wait. With this, I've learned just to do one side, just the top. I poured the latex onto it, and it would drip down in any case, luckily, because of fluid dynamics. And I just like saying that word. So it fixed it for me. But if I was to do something like this, with making a mold out of it, I would do it part by part. I would start with the face, with the reservoir on each side. I would pour it around, I had a reservoir around the eyes, around the edges that I didn't want. And so I get the face done first, and then I would put that reservoir edging here as well, get this top side. I would do the horns completely separate from the thing, so I could just cast those later and apply them to the next mold, and the mold casting. And then I get the back, and that's really how I do it, with just basically a reservoir along the edges. And it would take some time, because I'd have to wait for all that to dry after I do layer upon layer and layer, and then that's how that would be. So, you guys can come on in if you want.
I noticed you didn't mention it, but keying your molds, put them back together. If you do them piece by piece, if you do one half and the other, you need some way for them to stick together and line up.
Yeah, you can do that too. I'm sorry I forgot to mention that, because I really haven't done it too much with doing the outside walls. Like literally, I just pour stuff on there, and it luckily for me worked. I've never had to mirror anything or do anything as crazy as this, because I do small molding and stuff like that for small stuff like this, little crystal jewels and stuff like that recently. But with keying, what you do is, let's say you got this mold back on here, and what it does is what you do is you add little lumps on here so that the outer exterior dummy mold will adhere to it, so that it won't slide around, and it'll basically allow it to be work better with it, so that it doesn't warp. It just basically keeps it in place so it doesn't warp underneath it, you know. So let's say for some reason the resin wants to go into that, the latex wants to go into that shrinkage that he mentioned. It'll try pulling this way, but it'll have those little nubs there, so it'll just keep it there locked in place. That's how the theory goes for that.
Latex shrinks.
Yeah, it can. It can. I just looked, I never had that problem.
And warning, keep your latex away from your silicone.
I've never mixed those two together. How does that go?
If you mix up your silicone, look at it in the cup. It's going to be that way forever if it touches latex.
Really?
It never cures. Because latex usually has sulfur in it, so you can vulcanize it. And a lot of modeling clays have sulfur.
Okay.
And they will inhibit silicone from curing it.
Really?
I mean, it's just like you never mixed it. It just stays permanently liquid.
Oh,
It's ruined.
Oh, geez. That's actually a very valid point.
Yes, if you do modeling with clay and go to put silicone over it, use plastiline. I use Jolly King. That's a very soft one. I just got a bunch of NSP and Chavant from a place called Factor2.com. They had a fire sale where they were selling 2-pound bricks for $2.50. I bought them out. There's also a company called Fiberglass, spelled with a T on the end, online, www.fiberglass.com. And they sell the industrial super hard clay that they use for doing mock-ups of car bodies. You basically carve it. You don't shape it. And if you have to do anything like add more, you have to use a heat gun to do it.
Yeah. You can also, if you don't have a, that's a good mention of a heat gun. If you, it just reminded me of one way how I helped cure this thing, because it was cold when I did this. I essentially got a cardboard box, cut a hole in it, and stuck a heat gun in there. With it being this far away from heat guns, that's how I got this to cure really fast. That's why it's also kind of shrink. Actually, you know what? I guess there is an example of shrinkage right there. You got a question?
I do have a question on heat guns.
Okay.
Can you reshape resin after it's cured?
You can actually. I did have a bit of a warpage right here when I did cast this the first time with the, or not cast, applied the first layer of resin to it. So what I did was I took my heat gun, put it on this high heat setting, and I just heated this up. And the fiberglass and the resin will actually bend after you heat it up for a little bit. So you can actually kind of reshape it. The more layers you add to it, though, the harder it will be to do that. So if you get to be about like a ½ inch thick, it's generally going to take a lot of heat for a while to actually bend it. It's going to take some force and you might end up cracking it. So I would advise
and wear gloves so you don't burn yourself.
Yeah, that too. That too. I luckily don't have any burnt. Listen, I got hot glue burns all over my hands, but that's another story.
Well, keep in mind that faux fur is plastic, so that's going to melt all the fur on
I would think I would prefer.
Okay.
That brings up an interesting point also. The 45D, does that stick to itself?
It can actually. I've done once you do, like, once it cures, you can put another layer of it on there. Just make sure that it's clean. You don't got any dust particles or layering of dust on there. Generally, what I do is I just wash it.
Okay. The 65D does not.
Really?
Yes. Unless if you pour it into a mold, unless it's mechanically locked, it will separate. You can literally pop the next layer out.
Oh shoot! I mean, I never had to go back on any of these molds because I just was happy with them. So that's a good point. I'm still learning, like I said. But, so you said that's a 65D that does that?
65D.
Okay. This is the.
It gets a little bit better grip if you do another layer immediately. While the first layer is still a little tacky, then sometimes it does crack. But if you let it completely cure and then put another layer in, another whole layer, it'll just pop right out.
I don't hear that many good things about the 65D. I mean, every time I hear about it, it's like, okay, it doesn't do this, it doesn't do this, then you mention that.
Well, it starts very thin and it's good for rotational casting.
Okay.
Like Kitty here, the mold is basically a ball. I plug the end and I pour it in. I just sit there for 5 minutes just rotating and rolling it around.
Okay.
Letting it completely coat the inside. You don't have to spread it or anything. Stay. She gets that way.
Being a typical cat.
Yep.
So how is our maple syrup resin?
Oh,
set
that's
up?
a good point. Let's see here.